Hey and welcome to Neverwinter with Aragon. So here I want to cover my endgame build for the Barbarian Blademaster. It recently got a bunch of updates to improve its damage significantly. Now I did cover how you should play the Barbarian Blademaster for a lot of damage, multi-target and single target, and for a detailed explanation I would recommend checking out this video if you're unaware what to really use in terms of powers. But we will cover again briefly in this video what to be using in terms of the setup and rotations. I will have timestamps on the play bar below where you can skip to any section you're most interested in. First things first, however, some of you will be delighted to note I did write up a document where you can read through and follow this build section for section, seeing exactly what I'm using, and it can be a bit easier to check back on this rather than having to look for that, say, within the video. So let's jump into this build. The first thing, what is the purpose of the build? Well, it's to do pretty much anything in the game. You have a flexible build which will allow you to adapt to endgame groups, and a build that will give you the most amount of damage when running with randoms or just running solo. The build will get you all capped out 90% on these damage stats, allowing you to maximize your potential. You do also have a good few damage bonuses like the Knight, Bateri, Minsk, and so this build has a lot of damage going for it and should suffice in any content. You will of course want to switch a few things, and particularly when jumping in a group, you will want to adjust for group buffs and switch to some more damage buffs, which we'll get to that in that section. So now let's jump to the powers, the basics of Barbarian and what you should be using to actually output damage. First of all, single target. This would be a setup I would use. Brash Strike is your main at-will just to deal heavy single target damage. You will want to make sure you get the Relentless Slash buff of 5%. Again, it only lasts 12 seconds, so make sure you're continually refreshing that. In counter powers, I highly recommend Bloodletter with the Blood Spiller feat to maximize your damage output, Punishing Charge in combination with Trample of the Fallen, and then just Frenzy. There is a bunch of alternative ways that you can play. You can check some of these rotations just here in the details on them, but we're going with what I found to deal the most amount of damage. Your daily powers, of course, Crescendo, and then to note a bit on the mechanics. Your sprint ability gives you control immunity for 1 second every 3 seconds, and otherwise gives you a big burst in movement speed, allow you to get out of red zones quickly. Then you have your battle rage. While you're in combat and you're attacking, you will generate rage on this meter just here. You can gain a lot of it with encounter powers and then just generally attacking. Once that hits halfway, you can enter rage, and this will then deplete the bar over time. Now while within that, you gain some massive buffs depending on this feat at the end. We're using escalating rage here now for single target, and this can give us a 25 damage boost through the normal battle rage plus another 25% through escalating rage, meaning you're dealing 50% more damage while within that stance. It's huge. The class features, again, I do recommend Trample of the Fallen with Punishing Charge and Steel Blitz. For the feats, it only really matters with Blood Spiller here over Penetration and Escalating Rage. The others are multi-target. Now, one last thing to note with regards to your mechanic and powers is the ability to animation cancel. I will cover that more towards the end of the video in its own section. It requires using stamina, your sprint ability to effectively reduce the cast time of powers and still get them to deal damage. Again, more on that later. So now we move to our single target damage rotation. So if you're in an endgame group, you will most likely start out with an artifact call. And well, the first thing you'll want to do is enter combat, make sure you have combat advantage against your enemy. And well, ideally you would have full rage before entering the fight. Otherwise, ideally, you would have your party delay a little bit so you can get full rage. You mainly only need to get here and have the rampage buff. So here we're going to enter rage, use our artifact, Punishing Charge, Bloodletter, Frenzy, Crescendo, then our mount power, followed by Bloodletter, and then punishing charge again. And that is the artifact call for you. From there, you just use your abilities when they're off cooldown. If you have a belt item like Dragonfire, you will want to throw that in, of course, during the artifact call. Once you get enough rage here, just enter rage again and just continually use your encounter powers off cooldown. This is what I tested, and I found it gave the most damage. Now, you don't have to do animation cancelling to do a ton of damage on Barbarian, but you can to squeeze out a little bit more. Make sure to keep using that relentless slash every 12 seconds to get the buff, and by the time you're approaching the next artifact call like we are, just stop using your encounter powers as you'll want them off cooldown for that artifact call. You can check the timer on your artifact for a good guess of when that's going to occur. So right now it's off cooldown. We want to make sure we have the rage along with a rampage buff here. So we have enough rage. We can again go enter the rage artifact, punishing charge, bloodletter, frenzy, then use our crescendo, and then our mount combat power followed by bloodletter and punishing charge again. So you basically get to use two of them twice and frenzy just once. If you have another tacticians, you might be able to actually squeeze in that frenzy. Again, it's fairly straightforward, and Barbarian is not exactly that complicated. You can of course complicate things a little bit further, optimize your timing perfectly for certain content and the group you're in, and min-max things a little bit more efficiently with regards to the exact recharge speed you have, the exact cooldowns, and what's happening in the fight. But again, that is the basics. But now we move to our multi-target setup. I do recommend having a second loadout for this. So from what I tested, you should go with this. At will, relentless slash, it's your multi-target attack power, and you can use, say, bounding slam as your secondary. But if you find yourself not really using that, you may as well just go and use brash strike and have that slotted there to help finish off a tanky enemy while within rage. In counter powers, you want not so fast, hidden daggers, and axe storm. You can play around with, say, roar and also mighty leap with its fate, but I found this to just be the easiest and most reliable setup in terms of dealing multi-target damage. Daily power, I generally go with avalanche of steel with that feat, or you could have adamantine strike for that instant burst damage. But again, don't be afraid to mess around and just test out for yourself what it feels like to have unstoppable spin plus that spinning strike daily power. Just personally haven't found it very effective, but I'm sure there might be some niche cases and uses for it. Mechanics, same as say in the single target setup, just you can again use that sprint to animation cancel certain abilities to cast them a bit faster. Cast features remain the same here, with then the feats being all of them up, including the last feat on relentless battle rage instead of escalating battle rage, because you want to be getting that rage quicker. But now let's jump to a bit of a demonstration for multi-target damage. So we're coming up on a group of enemies here. What we want to do is weave hidden daggers between our other abilities to output as much damage as possible. So we're going to start things off with just a quick cast of hidden daggers. Enemies group up. We can go not so fast. We can go hidden daggers again. We can enter rage. We can use our axe storm. Let's get out of those red zones. We can use our hidden daggers again. And we can finish off this last guy with some at-will attacks. And we're done. Again, it goes like hidden daggers. The enemies are going to group up. So we go not so fast. Hidden daggers. Rage. Axe storm. And then use relentless slash from rage. Now what you can do with avalanche of steel is like run ahead of a group, use that avalanche of steel, and enemies might attack you, but you basically take no damage there. And then we can go with our hidden daggers, not so fast, rage, hidden daggers, axe storm, and then some relentless slashes here, ignoring some red areas because we're within rage. Do get some damage resistance, but just be aware if you know what you can survive and not survive. But that's it pretty much for multi-target. Again, you can optimize your timing, depend on the ad groups, how much hit points they have, but that setup is what I found kills groups of enemies the fastest when they have a bit of hit points. If you're just one-shotting them, well, that might just be best with Mighty Leap and Mightier Leap feat, and you can do that very readily. But from here, we're going to move on to the rest of the build and the setup, how you can optimize to get all of those stats and get as much damage output as you can. So now we go to our stats and how we want to prioritize them. Well, again, with this build, you're getting all 90%, so you don't really have to worry about that too much if you copy this build exactly. But if you can't access everything because you're not endgame yet, you haven't completed all the content, well, what you want to focus on is first of all power, then combat advantage, then crit severity, crit strike, and accuracy. Generally in that order. Just keep in mind crit severity you can afford to leave at 80% and get a 10% extra boost from raging criticals. You will of course want to focus on item level when in not scaled content, as that will give you this base damage. And you will want to get damage bonuses like Minsk, Materia, Neverwinter Night, and other things in other areas. And we'll cover that when we get to group optimization, where you can move some of these stats over to damage buffs when you're running with a group that will give you extra stats. For example, power here, we can get that to 90% by just using the Raptor's Instinct. That could give us like 18% power, and thus we can switch some things around and get some more damage buffs instead. So then we go to our race and ability scores, and I recommend just the Wood Elf as the best race here because it's giving that crit strike and it's very easy to build around. In terms of the ability scores, go with strength and dexterity. If you end up with too much crit severity, you can switch some dexterity over to charisma. Now, in terms of the gear, we have all of this stuff here, and I did cover in my document where all that gear comes from. There are alternatives to this gear. For example, this headpiece, you can use the Serene Hood from Dragon Hunts with the exact same bonus there. This armor, very easily coming from the campaign store. These arms from the Master Demon Web Pits, so on and so forth with all of that. Again, the location's located in the document here. You will want to work towards getting this stuff, but we're focusing on items that provide us the most amount of stats. You may worry about the negative critical avoidance you'll get from this armor, but usually you will be fine. If you run into problems, because let's say the latest master content requires a mitigation check that you don't seem to be surviving, usually those are not crit based, but if it is, well, you'll want to switch to the Mighty Kuros and make some adjustments there. Otherwise, there are like rings. You're going to get ones that are good against specific enemy types. For example, Lothian Abrasion, 10% against Beholders, very good in Examinance Reliquary. Same with Lothian Repulsion, giving the extra damage in Underdark. Additionally, there is a shirt which can give you 8% extra damage against Drowned Spiders, very good in the Demon Weapons Dungeon and Master Temple of the Spider. And you can use this shirt to give you damage if you didn't need the combat advantage. And again, we'll discuss that in group optimization. But for now, we're using all of this to get those stats at 90% while we are in combat with all of those effects of this gear triggered. Then we jump quickly to modifications. So armor kits and jewels, we just have an accuracy, crit strike, and a crit strike, and just combat advantage as the jewels, as that's about the best you can get there. Nothing goes in shirt and pants so far. Now jumping over to enchantments, we run with 2 cobalts here, an amethyst and a jade. Doesn't really matter what you have in defense, and I would recommend to have some that you can switch around. So you might want to have a jade here, a citrine, potentially another jade, and then some garnets, just to have flexibility to be able to switch things around and be able to end up with adapting to potentially what ring you might be using instead of this one. You might have another one, or what group bonuses you have, so on and so forth. Generally go with the Rage of Flames and the Devil's Precision. Again, don't worry about using them when you're just in low content. Only use them if you really need the extra damage. Otherwise, there's no harm missing some stats. Rage of Flames, you can switch that to some other damage overloads against enemy types from the Stronghold, depending on what content you're in. Combat enchantment, Lightning Flash, best way to go there. Recharge speed here as well. Otherwise, of course, there's movement speed if you really need that. For the artifacts, there's lots of alternatives to these as well. You want to be getting the 1500 item level ones. I've gone with these as they give me the stats and ratings that I pretty much need to get that optimized. From here we jump to companions. Now you will want to switch some things around depending if you're in multi-target or single target, or again if you're in group bonuses, which we'll discuss later. For single target, I usually just go with the Pseudo Dragon because it looks cute and it does some decent single target damage. You can check my companion document below and there's a whole list of ones and you can see what's competitive. However, for multi-target content, I really do like the effect that the Minotaur Mercenary has, and he's really good for his control effect and also grouping up effect with that Tidal Force. For the companion gear here, I would recommend getting some upgrades from the new campaign. If you want to be doing that, I just have some account bound stuff from Crown of Keldagon, and that gear just comes from the campaign store here. For the bonuses, we've got Perfect Vision for the accuracy. Used the Neverwinter Knight then, very good. We have Minsk, Batiri, Golden Cat, and we also have the Flame Sprite. Now we only have the Flame Sprite here instead of, say, the Tamed Velociraptor when we're not in that group where everybody would run those. This allows us to max out that critical strike and the crit severity, otherwise we would miss just a little bit of that, and so we need that to cap. And I could not find for the life of me anywhere else that would give me those stats and potentially use power here instead. I did try using, let's say, the compy for power and then using, say, the healing mitts here, and that just did not work. We missed 1.5% accuracy and that just would not do. For multi-target damage here, just switch the Batiri over to the Spine Devil. That's what I would recommend. It does a decent amount of damage in multi-target and definitely is better than using some stats which we already are maxed out on anyway. If your enemies are super squishy and you're just one-shotting them all the time, you could run something else here, potentially Ignis Skin instead of Minsk, or even the Phase Spider for crit strike and combat advantage. From there we go to mounts. Here in the current tab we do have Dominant Force, but if we are again in a party we will be switching that out, and we can most likely go with Ferocity for some personal damage gains, as that will help a teeny bit. It's not as good as you might think by reading the tooltip. Combat power here will depend on the setup you're running. So with single target, Wicked Lich is bugged right now to deal more damage than it should, but otherwise you'll be using something like Golden Touch, Big Base Hand, Giant Toad, Tunnel Vision, just for the single target damage. Multi-target damage, there's also a whole load of different ones out there. You can even use Explosive Equalizer, the Legendary Carpet, probably the two I would suggest. In terms of the stable, we have these bonuses here. We have an Executioner's Covenant and Mender's Covenant. They give us the stats and help us get those 90%. If you end up with more stats than you need, you can always switch these out, get another Warlord's Motivation and get another Tactician's Precision, as those are very useful there. Janner's Hex will trigger on, say, Punishing Charge, and so you do gain that little bit of an extra damage boost there. Keeping note of the different insignias, we have just some skill, brutality, dominance, and even some aggression here. For the collars, just focus on getting the encounter power damage one and the crit severity. You don't need to worry about upgrading them at all. You can just run with them on epic. You won't lose much damage. Then for the boons, I do not have all the boon points for this character, so we miss some. And I would just go with all of these that I have here. But you will be wanting to get Blessed Advantage as well. Very good in group content when running with a healer. And then you will also want to get these damage and damage resistance boons against enemy types, depending on what content you are running. Then you can go with Blessed Resilience for the survivability. You can go with Defense, Awareness, Critical Avoidance, then some hit points. Also get some stamina regen is nice too. For the guild, we just have these. Do recommend having a Revive Sickness if you're going to die and running any challenging content. Then we go to consumables and belt items.
So here we're using Watermelon Sorbet,
Flask of Potency, Ratatouille, and Sunlord's Gift Elixir. We also go ahead and use an Invocation Blessing, and we end up getting some power here with the little hammer icon there. But you wouldn't need that if you have your Forger's box upgraded. We still have it on green. Recommend looking up the video for that. You can easily get it upgraded to give you 3% power. I would run it as a belt item, but you can run the Spider Totem if you wanted to. I just don't see much point in running Master Temple Spider these days, so I wouldn't really worry about it. Just get the Forges box. Nice and easy, and will give some decent bonuses too. I would get the Dragonfire for the highest damage as a belt item there. There is alternatives though, like Doohickey, Hawk, even the Owlbear. They do okay as well. And then a Stone of Health for the clutch heal. You can of course have potions as well if you have a decent healer or you're scaled down. That is ultimately it for the entirety of this build. However, when you run party content, you need to optimize your build to fit the group bonuses that exist. And this is where you can see that in the document. So you're going to have things like Pack Tactics, Mystic Aura, Runic Aura, Tutor, Portobello, Paladin Crit Aura, and the Tamed Raptor all being able to give you all these extra bonuses. So you'll want to switch some things around. Now I'll just walk you through it here. So if you have Pack Tactics, then you'd want to switch the Amethyst enchantment over to a Garnet, allowing you to fit those extra ratings. If you have Tutor in the group, you have multiple different options. You could switch your shirt over to this shirt that would give you extra damage. We can see that just here from the Defense of the Moon Dancer, 3.5% extra damage. That gives the room for the 5% combat advantage there. You could also do it with switching your boots over to damage bonus ones like the Star Forged ones, Rusted or Sharp Long boots. Or you could even switch your elixir over to Wildstorm elixir. Doing that will have advantages if you want to switch your perfect weapons out. Then if you want to fit Portobello, I would switch the Golden Cat companion bonus over to the Book Imp or the Dark Dealer, as those will give accuracy instead of, say, the extra combat advantage here. Since you will be switching the Flame Survey out in most groups, you'll lose that accuracy there, and so gaining it over here can be very useful. Now that Tamed Velociraptor, you will want to switch your arms over to, say, the Healing Mitts. Alternatively, if you don't need the critical strike, you can also go with the Mighty Vambracers with 5% extra damage from there. The healing mitts are useful for the crit strike if you still needed that. You will want to switch the Flame Sprite over to that Velociraptor, and you will want to switch that Dominant Force Mount Combat Power over to Ferocity. With the Paladin Crit Aura, since you've switched the Flame Sprite companion over and using the Raptor, you should be able to make up that crit with that aura then and be able to fit that. And otherwise, if you want to go with a weapons set which is just for damage, so like Mirage, Weaver, Stormforged, you can do so just by going with the healing mitts and then just using Wildstorm elixir to get the crit severity capped. Alternatively, you can go with Squash Soup instead of Watermelon Sorbet and cap those stats that way. Now on a last note, I quickly want to cover Annimation Cancelling. There's a bunch you can do in order to optimize your damage output. But just to be clear, I have tested Barbarian without Annimation Cancelling whatsoever, and in single target damage they can perform competitively versus a lot of other classes. I'll cover my data in that in later videos and you can check that out. But you do not need to Annimation Cancel at all to still do very good damage on Barbarian after these changes. But you can use this to min-max to squeeze out maybe a few % more damage. The way this works is using your sprint. Now, I'm not sure how you do it on consoles. Somebody can let me know in the comments below and help other guys out, but it is possible, I know that. What you're going to need to do on PC is hold two movement keys down, both the opposite ones, so like A and D or W and S. So I press A and D, and then you can press your shift button, right? So now you are shifting, but on the spot without going anywhere. What this allows you to do is, because your sprint is prioritized over any other activity, you immediately stop whatever you're doing and go and sprint. So just using this can allow you to finish animations of powers earlier than you normally would if you just let it play through. And certain powers have it so that they will deal damage before the animation fully ends. So you can deal that damage, and as soon as the damage is done, you can cancel the rest of the animation, allowing you to cut down on cast times, allowing you to get a teeny bit more damage out. That is particularly prevalent with Relentless Slash, but you can do it with, say, Bloodletter here. allowing you to make it a like 0.5 second cast instead of a 0.7 second cast. However, again, if you're on PC, you can use a keybind to make this a lot easier for yourself. And that's just here. I'll put it in the video description below. You just copy this and you paste it in chat there. So now our relentless slash on our right mouse button is going to go, and when we just spam click it, it's going to automatically animation cancel. You don't want to spam it too hard, or you just don't deal any damage with it. Like if I spam it too quickly, the only thing that's doing my damage is the clone that spawns on the other side. So you're basically losing half the amount of damage you normally would. So you need to have a measured pace with that. But it makes it really easy also to, like, you cast Bloodletter and then you use the relentless slash to basically animation cancel it that way. Again, you can play around with yourself with other abilities, but I know Frenzy seems to only deal the damage after the full animation, and then you can't really animation cancel that. Now, if you don't want this keybind here anymore, you can just use the same command but type in unbind, or you can just go here, change the keybind back to our right press. And then if you want to change it to, let's say, your left mouse button, you'll have to just put L button here, and you'll have to change this plus power tray execute 1 over to what it says in your keybind page for your first at will, which is plus evaluate left click. Have that in there instead. You can see at will 2 is that plus power tray execute 1, and that's pretty simple. You can set that up for yourself, and that's pretty much animation cancelling. Again, I don't do it in my tests, and I found Barbarian damage pretty high performing, especially compared to other classes. It does very well there, and so it's not something you have to learn, but it is something you can work towards if you like to play the class a lot, and you'll find yourself naturally doing it. Say you want to cast a power quick and then just get out of a red zone, you'll just cast that and then run off, you know, and you're cancelling, say, the full animation you normally would have. It's all about learning, and you'll find out what powers you can cancel that end of the animation off and others that you can't. So you'll end up getting a feel for when the damage of the power actually hits, and then you can cancel the rest of the animation. Ultimately, I hope this build is somewhat insightful, and it should get you a ton of damage in endgame right now. All of those buffs drastically improved Barbarian's damage by a lot. You still will struggle, yes, as being a melee damage dealer, so you have a bit more of a challenge right there, but your ceiling in terms of damage output has definitely gone up to compete pretty well with some of the top damage dealers. You just need good timing and, of course, a good build. So once again, a massive thank you to all of these channel members for their added support, and we'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.